number one question on the program. How have current conditions affected students you serve? So Alana, would you go ahead, please?
Hi, I'm Alana Hendren. I'm the Executive Director of the Developmental Disabilities Association. And would just briefly like to tell you about special education in Vancouver. The Developmental Disabilities Association has been around since 1952. And the reason it was founded was because families who had children with special needs could not send them to school. There was an institution, Woodland School, that if you've been around the Lower Mainland for a while, you'll remember. But if you didn't put your kid in the institution and renounce all claims to them, you had no access to public education. So a group of families got together to try to educate their children in Vancouver. And they started in church basements. Bea Purdy was the first president of DDA, and she used to get her station wagon and pick up all these kids, and then another parent would volunteer and teach the kids, and another parent would assist. And then after a few years, they got a grant so they could hire a teacher, and I think the wage was something like $275 a month. And they had these two dedicated teachers who taught all these kids with special needs, no matter how old they were. And then, through lobbying efforts, the government had decided to acknowledge the rights of children to get an education in their neighborhood school. So as we were moving towards an integrated, inclusive environment, what happened is that DDA by that time had opened the Oak Ridge School, which was just for people with developmental disabilities. And sometimes you could see them on the bus with their lunch buckets and their often mismatched bright clothes, identifying them as people who definitely had special needs. And they went to the special needs school. And the great thing about it was that they built a community that is still in place today. There are friends who went to that school who still hang out together, who love each other, do things together, and know about each other. But once Oak Ridge School was given over to the Vancouver School Board, we wanted integration and inclusion. And in the, it would have been about the 80s and 90s, families pushed, teachers sacrificed, school boards dealt with difficult decisions on how children with special needs were truly going to be included in the classroom. And they came up with wonderfully creative programs. We saw these kids coming out of school. They had better communication skills by far, excellent socialization skills that they didn't have growing up in an institution, great community skills, and educational outcomes for literacy and numeracy actually went up. So then we get to the 2000s. The 2000s, funding started decreasing for school boards. A lot of dedicated special needs funding started going into sort of the general pot as school boards struggled to fund education. And now what's happened, as we come to the present day, is now we have 15 special needs schools, segregated education, again, in British Columbia. And this is a new development. What happens is that some of the special needs kids might have behaviors that are threatening to the teachers. We certainly wouldn't want teachers to feel unsafe, but there's no room for them in the school. So if these behaviors get out of line, the kids get thrown out of school. The moms and dads are told that they're going to have to homeschool, which means in many cases one of them has to quit their job. For single parents, that means the mom has to quit her job, stay at home with this kid, and go on welfare. But if they have enough money, they can go to pay for a space at a segregated school. So the irony of all this is that these parents who dedicated their lives to teaching their kids and leaving space for everyone else's kids to be educated are now having to pay for segregated school, and we've lost our way when it comes to inclusion and integration. So I hope that story tells you how we've essentially gone back over 50 years when it comes to educating kids with special needs. I think the school's doing a great job in as much as they can, but their expectations are up here and their funding reality is way down there. And until those two come together, I think we're going to continue to have problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Dan?
Thank you. First, I'd just like to take a moment to recognize the traditional territories on which we're doing this work today, and that's the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations, who've been here for thousands of years. So I'll speak on behalf of the Aboriginal community, although it's very hard to keep that separate from the large overlap with some of the other populations here, such as special needs, people living in poverty, and children in care. So, so for example, I think almost a third of Aboriginal children in the school system in Vancouver, which I know best, have some kind of a special designation. And so at the Education, Training and Employment table of the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Council, which is the policy body of all of our agencies in Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, we're looking at that and what that means. But to focus specifically on where people are at, I mean, the story is very similar in terms of we're just not where we should be and there needs to be a lot more done. Whether or not it's totally a funding issue is debatable, but I'm sure the funding issue contributes to it. And if you talk to the educators, I'm sure they would say that they just don't have enough hours in the day, minutes in the day, and support to do the work that they need to do. We do tend to be moving towards separating Aboriginal children, because what we have is a situation where we have Aboriginal enhancement workers in a lot of the schools that have a large Aboriginal student population. And so those students, those enhancement workers are trying to support the Aboriginal children that need additional supports. But what they're really trying to do is to bring in culture, because the BC chiefs of the First Nations in 1979 had a policy statement that came out. It was called Indian Control of Indian Education, and what they said at that time is, our children are not succeeding because you're not teaching them in our culture. Why would they go into another culture and be acculturated to a different culture? So that, in a sense, is a form of colonization. That's still the policy of the Assembly of First Nations nationally. It's also in the United Declarations of the Rights of Indigenous People that Aboriginal people should be, or all people have the right to be educated within their own culture and language. So I think what's not happening is we're not looking at how can the non-Aboriginal teachers who are teaching Aboriginal children help to teach those children within their own culture. And that's a very hard thing to do. And that's part of the reconciliation task that's before us, in terms of, if Canada wants to recognize not only people who've come here over the past couple of generations plus the past couple hundred years plus new immigrants, and this official policy of multiculturalism that we have, we're a new immigrant society that adds about 1% of our population every year through immigration. There's a lot of focus on that, but we also have to focus on the Aboriginal people and the history of colonization as the settlers have come in. And we need to do this reconciliation piece, so there needs to be a lot more work done on that. And that does take some funding. And I mean, I'm non-Aboriginal, I'm Irish and Belgian, but I've been working with the Aboriginal community for over 20 years, and so I was always hoping that there would be a faster change, and there hasn't been a faster change. We've come a long way, but there's a long way to go, because working at a college, we still have over 100 young people who left high school early, and they're coming back in their early 20s, sometimes with children, now they're parents, and they're trying to get their basic education, and that takes time. It can take a couple of years. They're living on welfare. They have very little money, and so the school system is still not meeting the needs of Aboriginal children. There are more graduating, but it's still a very low number, and we keep looking for a tipping point where something will change with this reconciliation journey that we're on, that those children will make it through high school in much greater numbers and will leap forward from 30, 40, 50% graduation rates up to, equivalent to the non-Aboriginal population of at least 70, 80%. What's happening is, although the outcomes for Aboriginal children are going up, the outcomes for non-Aboriginal children are going up even faster, so the gap is actually widening. So there's a lot more effort that we have to put into this effort of going back and looking at the history of colonization, and particularly looking at Aboriginal culture and seeing the benefit and the good that's there, instead of what's really happening, I believe, is that people are rejecting it and saying that culture's not good because look at where it's gotten to you, and that's not an honorable way to act, and we need to look at those issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dylan?
Regarding kids in care, the government, and specifically foster care, first of all, it's a very complex issue, and it's not just a role of public education in regards to graduation rates. It's all of our responsibility and everybody's responsibility. But I think what the numbers say that less than 50%, and that's being generous, are graduating high school as compared to 80% of non-kids in care. So clearly there's a lack of something. In my experience working through the system, many kids in care, either through going through multiple placements or going through many school programs, ultimately fall through the cracks in their early years and get to a point in high school where the behaviors start sticking out, and then they're focused on the behaviors, and then there's kind of a transition of different alternate schools, and where then the focus of graduating education kind of is secondary towards just attendance and life skill development and work employment and stuff. So then maybe when there's an alternate program when they're older, at 16 or plus, the focus of kids in care is not on education, and it's not because they're not smart enough to graduate, it's just because ultimately there's time and there's the reality that they're going to be on their own at 18. So do you focus on a course, or do you focus on getting them ready to live on their own and pay in today's world, and ultimately get them ready for work? And so it's very, if we had more supports, and as well as when kids are younger, and to get IEPs and everything, you need to get the assessments, and wait lists for assessments to get an IEP is probably 1 to 2 years now. So you're talking 2 years that they're in elementary schools and not receiving support. So also regarding and myself as a parent, I currently have a 7-year-old autistic son in a North Vancouver school, and I can tell you as a kid with those kind of needs, the challenge to get supports for them is it's amazing, so, and the amount of work that it takes for myself, and I'm a professional in the field, and everything I have to do. So, when you compare that to most of our kids in care, either rotating social workers or guardians or moving, different regions, that the level of support to get the care and to get the supports in the school system is huge from the parental part. And so, there's many reasons why, why graduation rates are low, but as we'll get to later on, it's not because youth in care aren't capable of graduating. We'll talk about a little bit more about specialized tutoring and aspects like that, but and if you focus on a distance ed and one-to-one tutoring, many kids are able to graduate and are able to succeed. It's just we got to get creative in how we're teaching and supporting them. So, leave it at that.
Thank you, Dylan. Jason?
Can you hear me? Yes. I'm the person who faces reality. So if you give me money, my eyes will light up. You give me statistic about money, I have a headache. you really need to have a doctor degree to understand all the money stuff of school, but it's so hard. Now, but before, I have no criticism about the school system of how it handled the money, because my experience in Vancouver is quite good. I live in Park Coquitlam, but I'm not familiar with the system there, except my son, he studied there. My son, he's 30 already. He's also an autistic young man. He has his birthday party on Friday, still playing with toys. Now, for the Vancouver, the population I work with is the immigration kid, the one from, mainly those are from Asia. Now, for Vancouver, they have some, I think, very good so-called device and mechanism. Firstly, in the past, they have ESL counselor. After some time, they don't have it. And at that time, it's a funding cut. And it's spread out to all counselors. Second, then it changed to have, they always have the multicultural liaison worker, that is for interpretation, translation. So the language part has been taken care of. Now, we have the SWIS, settlement worker in school, the SU.C.C.E.S.S. Vancouver is the one that I think the biggest amount of money. And they have a team, and it's very so-called multicultural. They take care of the students, 8 so-called has been in Canada year 3 or under. So 3 years or under. So this is the second part. So the settlement part has been taken care of, so-called. The third is, for in general, as a service agency, we can work with the community school team for Vancouver School Board, so to coordinate the service. So these 3 things, I think they're very good. It can be like a model for other districts. But there is one thing coming up. The money for the S.U.C.C.E.S.S is from IRCC, Immigrant, Refugee, Citizens Canada. They only serve people have been here 3 years or under. Once you above that, one day, you are not eligible for the service, including your family, through the school system. Now the problem is then 3 years not necessarily you are integrated, so-called well. It really depends on very different people. So we give them a name we call aging out youth. Aging out from the 3 years, that's the first. Aging out from the school system, grade 12. Aging out from age 19. All these 3 aging out students, basically, they are not taken care of well, especially those age out from the school system. Actually, they disappear. It's so hard to get money from anywhere to serve these people. Not talking about even in the school. Once you leave the school, you leave. Bye-bye. For us, we really want to have funding that we can work together to engage the youth now. For the Swiss, my comment is, they are in the school, so they are very convenient in helping. But at the same time, they carry the authority. So the students, they come to the program because of the authority. For us, as an outside school agency, we go in and we engage the youth because they see, oh, you don't belong to the school. It's a step to help them move beyond to school rather than just being included there. So moving the students beyond the school system is a very important way of helping them. Okay, I stop here.
Please, Carol.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alex. I really appreciated you putting some context to numbers. I know that being in the downtown east side, it's really tough when people throw out numbers, $1 million a day is wasted here. And if you put things into context, of course, it gives you, a real reality check. And we know that most nonprofit organizations down here are really struggling. I also wanted to thank the people, Joe Hall and the people at SFU for hosting this. It's really great that they do these programs. In the neighborhood that you're in, there are 2 elementary schools, and I think a lot of people forget that there actually are children here. So where the neighborhood house is a couple of blocks away from Strathcona. Last year they had a population of close to 600. So as you move through the wave of humanity that is on Hastings Street, you can imagine a little bit about what a child's reality is in this community. And I think it's really important to remember that, when we talk about war-torn communities or people who have experienced devastation, after housing and food, schools are the most important thing. And that's true in this community as well. And unfortunately, a lot of the effort and energy for the families here goes into very basic needs. I'm going to try to give a little bit of context because I've done a few things other than work at neighborhood houses. And for 10 years, I actually worked for the Vancouver School Board. And after that, I spent 3 years working on HIV/AIDS, and for a very short period of time, I was a prison outreach worker. So I had come from inner city schools and then walked into the prisons. The prisons in the Fraser Valley are actually in better shape than some of our schools. And I don't say that lightly. Like, the grounds are better maintained, there are newer buildings. And I think that we really, as a community, need to kind of check our head a little bit about what that priority is. And I really implore the people who have access elsewhere, to bring this conversation up with your neighbors. Families should not be having to go to school to be fed, and in this neighborhood, that's actually what happens. And so the resources that are supposed to be leveling the playing field for children in need and who have multiple vulnerabilities, that just simply is not happening. The other thing that I'm very cautioned about is that we're competing as nonprofits for funding dollars with schools, and my experience with donors, and I don't want to sound like I'm trashing donors, because really I need them desperately, but sometimes the reason that they're there isn't for the same kinds of reasons that we hold. They don't have the same values about public education. So it's a cautionary tale, and I see the 1 minute is up, so I will stop.
Before we leave, what do you mean by they don't have the same values?
I don't think that they're necessarily interested in public education. I think that they have ideals and values that don't necessarily align with sort of the broader good.
Thank you. Well, First Call has made their effort with this forum today, and SFU's Office of Community Engagement here at Woodward's, and Your Education Matters. You will be able to find video of this meeting entirely and excerpted at youreducationmatters.ca. And Your Education Matters will be having other events, for example, on March 8th with the Institute of Public Education, and we hope to be announcing other things too, to all help raise understanding of these issues. I speak for all the members of the panel, and first of all, from me thanking them, and from us thanking you. We're trying to do something for the future of British Columbia through its young people.